Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Homan. I'm the Legislative Director here at the New York State Association of Counties. I'm here with my colleague, Dave Lucas, who's our Director of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs. We want to thank everyone for taking the time to be a part of this webinar this morning. Counties over the last year and a half have been working very diligently in preparing for the new law that makes very substantive changes to procedures and mechanisms used to process 16 and 17-year-olds in our criminal justice system today. So as we draw near to the October 1st, 2018 Raise the Age implementation date, we wanted to have the state provide just an update on some of the guidance and procedures and where we are thus far. We do encourage our counties to continue working with other county departments, and we are always a resource here at NYSAC as well. Before we get started with the webinar, I just want to go through some housekeeping items. We do have a large volume of participants that are attending the webinar, so we will be keeping everybody on mute. You can still participate by submitting written questions through your dashboard. We will do our best to try and get to all those questions. However, if we are unable to, we will have the state provide us responses and send that out to all participants via email sometime this week. If you do have any technical issues during the webinar, you can call our office and speak to Juanita Munguia. She can help walk through some troubleshooting issues. And then if you have any questions following the webinar, you can reach out to Dave Lucas in our office and he'll be able to provide you any information. With that being said, and we also will be putting the PowerPoint on our YouTube channel with this whole recording within the next week. With that being said, I'm going to actually turn it over to Joe Popkin and Carrie Nyfield from the governor's office, and we can get started.
Hey, Katie, this is Cal Whiting. I'm actually going to be handling the first few slides here. So good morning, everybody. My name is Cal Whiting. I'm a policy advisor for public safety in the governor's office and part of the Raise the Age implementation team here for the state. So I'll just open it up with a few brief remarks, kind of overviewing what the state efforts have been to get ready for the October 1st deadline, and then I'll hand it over to the agencies to go into details about what they've been doing. Next slide, please, Katie. So just a brief bit of background. I know most of you have heard this through the Raise the Age roundtables, but just a brief refresher. The Raise the Age legislation was signed by the governor on April 10th, 2017. Following up the next year as part of the budget, the governor recommended and was approved through the budget a $100 million investment for Raise the Age related expenditures to cover both state and local expenditures to implement Raise the Age. And this has been a collaborative effort between the Human Services and Public Safety agencies of the state. And the implementation team has included the Office of Children and Family Services, Division of Criminal Justice Services, State Commission of Correction, Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, Division of Budget, as well as the Governor's Office. Next slide, please. So this slide really provides an overview of the major milestones that we've accomplished over the last months to reach this October 1st deadline. First, most recently, the Raise the Age Task Force members were announced on April 30th. This committee will serve as an oversight for Raise the Age implementation at both the state and local level. Also recently, the fiscal planning instrument was sent to the counties on June 6th. This fiscal instrument is available on the Raise the Age website, and DOB will go into further details about this later. OCFS and SCOC have issued their specialized secure detention regulations, and those were sent to the counties. Everybody should have access to those. Also, the Raise the Age Local Planning Guide was a collaborative effort between all the implementation agencies and the governor's office, and that was sent to the counties as well. I just mentioned the $100 million included in this year's budget. Population projections were created in coordination between DCGS and OCFS, and those were sent to all county execs, local social service directors, probation directors, sheriffs, and DA's offices. As most of you know, I think participated in the Raise the Age regional roundtables. Those occurred from July to August of 2017. The state team that you'll hear from today went to all regions of the state and presented to probation, local service, social services, sheriffs, DAs, as well as county execs. And just a brief reminder, we've been having ongoing interagency meetings with the Office of Court Administration and State Education Department, as well as other partners. Next slide, please. I just mentioned the $100 million investment for Raise the Age. This money is really focused on early intervention and diversion programs to prevent an influx of youth into the juvenile justice system. We really want to front load these services to prevent an influx of people that will overburden the system. The funding strategy will also reduce long-term costs in the out years. Next slide, please. I mentioned the Raise the Age Task Force earlier. This was announced on April 30th. As you can see, this includes a nice mix of state agencies, courts, not-for-profits, and local associations. And this committee will really serve as an oversight body to monitor Raise the Age implementation at the state and local level. Next slide, please. With that, I'll hand it over to Bob Macarone, who is the Director of the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives at DCGS, and he'll provide an update on what they've been doing on the probation side. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. I'm speaking, and I know our Commissioner Mike Green's on the line as well, speaking on behalf of what the Division of Criminal Justice Services is accomplishing, and our status really falls into three key areas: training, regulations, informing practice, and automation facilitating functionality among probation practitioners. So the next slide, Probation Raise the Age Objectives. Next slide, please. A number of key objectives. First and foremost, effective client engagement in offering community-based services to improve youth outcomes. Front-loading probation services, early client engagement. We're doing that through an enhanced functionality with intake and adjustment so as to avoid formal petition and family court adjudication. We want to increase the rates of probation adjustment or diversion, and we want to reduce the need for family court adjudication. We also, in the spirit of the legislation and the presumption of reduced reliance on detention, expect to do a lot more in terms of detention screening and offering up to the court alternatives to detention, as well as alternatives to placement, and reduce the rate of probation violations that drive costly detention and placement. At present, about 20% of those cases going off to placement of probation violations. We think we can do better, given the availability of evidence-based community services. And then lastly, of course, we want to reduce long-term recidivism rates. Next slide, please. So the probation specialized juvenile justice training, in terms of training, we designed a specialized training for juvenile probation officers. It will become part of our what we refer to as the Fundamentals of Probation Practice, which is a 3-week, 90-hour certified course for peace officers, probation officers at present. That basic training curriculum for all new probation officers will become 4 weeks in the spring of 2019. But during the interim, we expect to deliver and have delivered this 1 week of training. It includes the following components. 1, training probation officers with the skills to effectively engage clients and ensuring that our treatment of those youth are trauma informed. 2, it is based on the principles of procedural justice. And by that, we mean building relationships of mutual respect and fairness with our clients, with the youth, in order so that we are respected as mentors, as guides, and agents of change to help them go through the reevaluation and thinking process. If we're successful in having them reevaluate their thinking and growing, we can be successful in influencing their behavior, ensuring law-abiding behavior in the future. We expect to utilize evidence-based practices in doing this. We already use uniform risk and need assessments for case planning and supervision practices. And, I don't want to emphasize that. We use these assessment instruments to identify the drivers of criminal behavior, the criminogenic needs. So they are supervision tools. And we have a uniform tool that's used in the 57 counties throughout the state of New York, outside of New York City. That's called the YASI, the Youth Assessment Screening Instrument. New York City is using the Level of Service Inventory for Youth, also a well-respected instrument. All of our probation officers will graduate from the 5-day program with 2 days of motivational interviewing skills. And we can't say enough about the importance of being trained in motivational interviewing skills. Motivational interviewing is the currency by which we communicate with clients. We are strong believers in the stages of change, authored by three authors, Pachaska, DiClementi, and Norcross, that goes through various stages of change, recognizing that the vast majority of individuals who come to probation for guidance and for help come with pre-contemplation. That is, they're not accepting of the need for themselves to change. So that's the role of the probation officer in working with them to realize that change. The training includes a half day on implicit bias and racial and ethnic disparities training, training in cognitive behavioral interventions, the use of graduated responses, and I want to emphasize the use of incentives and rewards. The literature is quite clear that incentives used in the ratio of 4-to-1 to sanctions can be far more effective in resulting in offender change. And differential responses to non-compliant behavior. And this is where we think we can make major inroads in reducing probation violations, in understanding that youths who sometimes fall off the wagon, so to speak, really need retooling, coming back and practicing the skills that they were taught by their probation officer to continue law-abiding behavior. But there's much that we can do in the community with sanctions rather than moving toward violation status. And then lastly, we built in a piece on transitioning. So we expect to remain available to youth in the community as an assist when they need help. They don't need to be rearrested to call their probation officer for assistance. Next slide, please. So we expect to do this in 6 trainings throughout the state. And indeed, we began our first pilot program in April in Albany. We followed up in June in Buffalo. Last week, we concluded the one in White Plains. And on July 30th, we'll expect to do the 1-week training in Syracuse and Onondaga County, in September in Massapequa on Long Island, and then in December in Lake George in the North Country. Our Commissioner, Mike Green, has addressed several of those groups and actually gone on site in Erie and expects to visit Syracuse as well as the Albany group. So strong message and leadership from DCJS on probation officer training. In 2019, we'll continue to repeat those training sessions. By the end of this calendar year, 2018, we will have trained over 300 probation officers from throughout the state, juvenile probation officers, in the evidence-based practices. Next slide, please. We are extending our training to the judiciary for at least 6 or 8 months. DCJS, the Office of Children and Family Services, the State Commission of Correction, and the Office of Children and Family Services have continued to meet on a bi-monthly basis to ensure collaboration and coordination of efforts. And out of this came the request by the judiciary for probation to train them during the summer seminars held in Westchester County. It's a half-day training provided by probation by DCJS in coordination with local probation directors. We did our first training last Friday on July 20th. We expect to do the second and third on July 20th, 27th, and August 10th, respectively. It's an hour presentation on new probation practices and functionality, followed by an hour with a panel presentation with question and answer. It was very, very well received. I sent the PowerPoint out to all the probation directors across the state. I heard from Nancy Schmidt this morning in Ulster County, who also forwarded to the DA Defense Counsel and received really positive comments on the PowerPoint and changes. Next slide, please. So the program changes that we expect to implement to seek the more successful outcomes with individuals include the following. 1, we're going to screen youth and provide alternatives to detention, including respite, enhanced intensive supervision, predispositional supervision, intensive case management, and the expanded use of electronic monitoring. We're eminently aware of the importance of reducing reliance on detention and the cost to localities. And so probation believes that we can be effective in providing alternatives to detention. Similarly, we expect to front-load services for improved probation intake and adjustment. Of the cases that are both eligible statutorily and suitable for intake and adjustment pursuant to the family court rules promulgated by OCA, probation adjusts upwards of 90% of all eligible cases today. We think we can even do better than that. We expect to provide voluntary assessment and case planning services in the youth part and advise courts of alternatives to detention. In the major jurisdiction, we will have a full-time presence, and the financial instrument provides for that. In the other counties, they'll be requested by the courts when they arraign that individual, what may be every second or third week of a 16, 17-year-old who's been arrested. Probation will go to the court, have a presence, offer voluntary assessment and case planning services, and also be available to inform and advise the court of alternatives to detention and alternatives to secure detention. Lastly, we expect to enhance our supervision of individuals placed on probation supervision through the use of effective community-based services. I'll talk about that in a moment. And as earlier I had said, we expect to use graduated responses, importantly stressing incentives to address non-compliant behavior. Next slide, please. The financial instrument offers guidance to localities to look at the request for and need for community-based services. And DCGS did a lot of work over the last 8 months with our offices of Justice Research and Performance and Office of Program Planning and Development to divide community-based services into low intensity, that would include youth court, mediation, community services. In Albany, they have a very fine juvenile accountability board. The need for implementing cognitive behavioral interventions. We happen to like the NIC thinking for a change, but there's also a well-respected aggression replacement therapy. All of the programs are being trained, all of the counties, on the use of interactive journaling and training on our vocational educational assistance program called Career University Ready, Set, Work. We have made a conscious effort to address the needs of behavioral health. We expect probation officers will utilize a mental health screen that will indicate those youth who require clinical assessment and evaluation by a licensed mental health professional for either substance abuse or mental health treatment. And we've done our best to provide resources to the counties that will provide for the expedited clinical evaluation and assessment of those youth, particularly during the intake and adjustment process. I'll move on to intensive family therapy. Probation officers are trained to engage the families effectively. They will utilize a number of resources. These are cognitive programs with 30 years of research and evaluated associated with them, including brief strategic family therapy, functional family therapy, and multi-systemic therapy. There'll be an emphasis with this population on vocational training as well, because what we recognize is the older population requires self-sufficiency, the ability to succeed on their own as they grow older. Last slide is technology improvements. Over the years, DCGS has worked with localities to develop a single probation automated case management system. It's called Caseload Explorer. It's made available through a private vendor. Each of the counties uses this uniform automated case management system. The application is developed by our office within DCGS. 57 of the 58 counties, including New York City, use the Caseload Explorer system. We're in the current process of implementing a major statement of work that includes all the functionality changes that will be in place by October 1st, 2018 for probation officers to effectively manage adolescent offenders and 16, 17-year-olds effectively. We're also doing further programming changes to equip probation officers to successfully implement Raise the Age and provide a statewide resource of data. That, combined with information from the Office of Court Administration, will enable our partners in research here at DCGS, the Office of Justice Research and Performance, and at OCFS to successfully evaluate the merits of RTA and how it's being implemented across the state. That concludes my presentation, and I guess I'm shifting over, passing the torch to the Office of Children and Family Services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. This is Dr. Nina Alladort. I'm with the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. I'm here at representing Acting Commissioner Sheila Poole, Deputy Commissioners Laura Velez and Inez Nieves. OCFS has spent the last year really working very intensively on looking at our detention continuum and working on the new type of detention in collaboration with SCOC and working with our current providers on what we need to do to be ready, looking at our residential capacity for raised age foster care youth and our OCFS facilities, and also working on judicial training. Next slide, please. So detention has taken a lot of focus from OCFS, and we have spent much of the time working on our providers by having meetings and webinars and really looking at not just how are they doing their practice now, but how to really prepare for the first time in a long time being more capacitated and be more utilized than we have in several years. We also worked with our non-secure detention providers because we have very large unutilized capacity in non-secure detention that could really be used for many of the young people who are currently placed in secure detention, but could really be served just as well, if not better, in a non-secure facility who are already serving young people well up into ages of 17 and 18 because the PINS youth are also being placed there. We've conducted enormous numbers of site visits. We've provided technical assistance to both counties and providers, and we've given policy guidance as well. We also have met with the sheriffs to talk about some of their concerns regarding transportation. Next slide, please. One of the key items that we worked on this year with the State Commission on Corrections was to promulgate the regulations for specialized secure detention, which the first set were published in December of 2017. We worked with both counties and a consortia of counties to provide them with data projections and to help them sort through what their real expectations might be to prepare them for their planning. We spent enormous time internally really working on improving our billing and claiming methodology for secure and specialized secure detention, recognizing that our current system of billing and claiming was always behind and wasn't always helpful to either the provider counties of detention or the user counties. The sometimes 2 or 3 year lag in projections of cost were impacting counties' abilities to really project the amount that they might be able to roll over for STSJP. So we've come up with a more real-time billing and claiming methodology. So we're hoping by the end of the first year that everybody should really be caught up and working in real time. One of the other areas that we know doesn't get talked about a lot, but is sort of hanging out, is the issue with PINS and the funding for PINS, the state share funding for PINS, that there's a placeholder in the 2019 budget. And in preparation for really helping localities who have particularly high numbers of PINS detention or placement, we worked with DCJS and the Unified Court System and the Permanent Judicial Commission just this summer to hold the first statewide meeting about status offenders and really figuring out where people might be able to decrease their reliance on either bringing petitions forward or even going to detention or placement. And we will continue to be working on that throughout this coming year. We have been working with all of the current secure providers who will be also our specialized secure providers on bringing their infrastructure, their physical infrastructure, into compliance with the regulations for the specialized secure. And we have construction in progress at 6 of the 8 secure detention facilities, and there is pending construction at 2 of them. And everybody is really looking to expand their capacity, but trying to figure out what is the right capacity. We don't want to overbuild beds that will then sit empty in a year or so, but we also are trying to avoid a crisis in the use of our secure detention facilities. So we have really been talking also to the judiciary and to the counties about taking a very hard look at their current detention data. And if folks really need that, where it's still available, to really look at the under 13, the kids who are under 13 who are in secure detention, the young people who are misdemeanants who are in detention, the kids who are in detention, in secure detention, only on a violation of probation, to figure out not only, as my colleague Bob was just talking about, the alternatives to detention, but the correct level of detention for young people who might be better served in a less secure setting, considering that most young people end up, if they are in fact placed, they end up placed in a non-secure setting at the level of placement. We also have been working on our child welfare residential beds for raise the age JDs. This is for the 16 and 17-year-olds that we expect to see coming in to LDSS or OCFS custody, who can be placed safely in a voluntary agency. We released a request for application for specialized residential services for raise the age, who are expected to proceed through family court. We approved 13 voluntary agencies to create specialized raise the age statewide programs. We have 171 beds that we are preparing for year 1. We created a special maximum state allowable rate to provide for enhanced programming and staffing. One of the challenges everybody is aware of is that without the right incentives for staff, it is hard to attract and then retain staff in these positions. So we've made sure to really give the voluntary agencies the tools that they need to find the right staff who are really at the front lines of helping the young people change and move on to a successful adulthood. And we've been convening monthly learning collaborative meetings with these 13 voluntary agencies. A key piece of these beds is also the inclusion for the first time of mandatory aftercare for young people who come through the programs. The aftercare will be provided primarily by the voluntary agencies with whom they are placed, and that will really rely on a shortened length of stay of a maximum of 8 months in the actual placement, which gives them 4 or more months at liberty in the community with services and community supervision to help the young person have a supported reentry back into their communities, their families, and to be successful. This is a key piece of our model that is really new for kids in voluntary agencies, although OCFS has been providing aftercare for many years. Next slide, please. We have worked with counties to establish what we're calling anchor counties to support the voluntary agency startup costs and gap expenses for the first 3 years. There's an MOU that's been developed between OCFS and the anchor counties. We're working on the model contract language for the counties and the voluntary agencies for Raise the Age programs. This will be done, we hope, very soon. And as was pointed out in the beginning, this has really been a tremendous collaborative effort. We have been working extremely closely with the state education department to make sure that the educational and vocational programming in these programs is responsive to the needs of older young people, some of whom will be looking for their Regents diploma, others will be looking for a task, and others will be looking for a vocational opportunity. Next slide, please. We have also been recognizing that we needed to bring up a little bit more capacity at our own OCFS facilities, the state facilities. So we have recommissioned buildings at the Industry Residential Center campus in Rush, New York to add 80 limited secure male beds. We are reopening the Harriet Tubman Residential Center in Senate, New York to provide 24 limited secure female beds. And we will continue to monitor the placement trends during the initial months of Raise the Age to see if these bed numbers are sufficient or what we might need to do in the future for the population JD demand. Next slide, please. Like our colleagues at DCJS, we also recognize that working closely with our partners at the Unified Court System is really critical to the success of this. The presumption against detention, the willingness to use alternatives to detention and alternatives to placement are really going to be critical to the spirit of Raise the Age to make sure that we continue to leverage the gains that we have seen in the last few years of really continued drop in the reliance on detention and placement for young people who don't need to be in confinement settings or removed from their communities and their families. So we focused on explaining to them the levels and the types of detention, the levels and types of placement, talking about the family court detention risk assessment instrument for juvenile delinquents, which is currently the only risk assessment instrument for detention that exists. How to really think about detention decision making, and to start talking about the shortened lengths of stay and placement for the opportunity for aftercare. And I will hand off at this point to our colleagues from the State Commission of Correction, Commissioner Riley.
Good morning. State Commission of Correction regulations have been promulgated for construction, renovation, and certificate of specialized secured detention facilities, other known as SSDs. Construction and renovation regulations can be found at 9 of the New York Code Rules and Regulations, Part 7303. Certification regulations can be found at 9 of the New York Code Rules and Regulations, Part 7304. Please contact Deputy Director Terry Moran with any questions, ideas at info@scoc.ny.gov. Again, that's info@scoc.ny.gov. SCOC is also available for any technical assistance. Next slide, please. Regulations regarding operations have been proposed and can be located on the SCOC website at www.scoc.ny.gov. Proposed regulations covered admissions, security and supervision, visitation, food service, health and mental health services, classification, personal hygiene, classification, max facility capacity, reportable incidents, printed material and publications, exercise, recreation and leisure activities, access to legal services, grievance program, correspondence and telephone, religion, deathbed and funeral visits, non-discriminatory treatment, sanitation, fire prevention and safety, environmental health and safety, good behavior allowances and sentencing calculations, and variance. I will now turn it over to the State Department of Corrections Community Services.
Hi, good morning all. Dan Marticello, I'm the Acting Executive Deputy Commissioner for DOCS. As we've previously discussed in past meetings, as a result of the Governor's Executive Order 150, we had previously turned the Hudson Correctional Facility to house 16 and 17-year-olds that were currently in our custody. That facility will be the first facility to transition to an adolescent offender facility under Raise the Age. Hudson Adolescent Offender Facility will remain the only reception center to receive adolescent offenders from the counties and will be the only facility to house female adolescent offenders. In looking at our population projections, we identified a need for 2 additional sites geographically displaced across the state. The second site, we will convert the Adirondack Correctional Facility into an adolescent offender facility. We are currently undergoing renovations with our partners at the Office of General Services and the operational date for Adirondack will coincide with the first year of implementation, which was October 1st of 2018. At that location, we are currently undergoing ongoing specialized training for our staff, which the law prescribes, that we've developed in partnership with our colleagues at the Office of Children and Family Services. The third location, we are currently under renovations at the Groveland Annex, which was formerly closed and will be stood up as a standalone adolescent offender facility known as Saunier Adolescent Offender Facility, and that'll be operational October 1st of 2019. Next slide, please. As an interim measure before the law takes effect, DOCS will continue to review requests from the counties to house 16 and 17-year-olds who receive a definite sentence of imprisonment in excess of 90 days at the Hudson facility. If approved, due to limited capacity, there will be a per capita cost associated with that. And after October 1st of 18, we'll no longer accept the 16-year-old adolescent offenders, but we'll continue to review and make determinations as it pertains to the 17-year-olds. Next slide, please. In terms of our discharge planning services, there'll be a coordinated effort internally at DOCS between our facility staff, as well as our community supervision staff, reentry services, in conjunction with the county reentry task forces and the Office of Children and Family Services. Where appropriate, these discharge plans will include family reintegration, mental health and medical continuity of care, housing assistance, employment, and ongoing educational needs. Additionally, as was previously developed through ongoing discussions with local DSS commissioners at a conference held by OTDA, we've developed a monthly automated email notification that counties can sign up for, which will provide information on not only inmates being released back to their county and some demographic information on needs they may require, but also information on adolescent offenders being released to the counties. Next slide, please. Our community supervision staff will provide post-release supervision to both AOs released from DOCS and JOs released from OCFS and DOCS. They'll be supervised by a parole officer in the bureau associated with the county and area of residence where the AO or the JO is returning to. Until the age of 18, they'll be supervised under a youthful offender risk level, which is a supervision ratio of 40-to-1. And then once they attain the age of 18, a risk assessment instrument will determine the appropriate level of supervision. As there's a number of literature out there that indicates that they should be supervised based on that instrument rather than over or under supervising. Next slide, please. Actually, at this point, I will turn it over to my colleague at the Division of Budget.
Good morning, and thank you, everybody. This is Todd Sherman from Division of the Budget. Just a couple of slides to conclude our presentation this morning. Since the budget was adopted on April 1st, we've been working to operationalize the financial provisions that were included in the budget. The first step that we've taken is to provide the documentation of individual counties' eligibility for the 100% reimbursement. Earlier just about a month ago, the Division of the Budget communicated with each of the county executives' offices, and copies of those documents were also provided to the probation offices and social services offices. It's essentially the forms that need to be returned to my office for the purposes of certifying the eligibility for the cost waiver. A little bit of an update to the slide. As of the end of the day yesterday, 21 counties have submitted the certifications that they were compliant with the tax cap. If you have not already done so, I would encourage you to return that. Information is available on the communication that went to the various county offices. If you would please move to the next slide. If your county did not comply with the tax cap, we also provided documents that would assist in submitting the financial hardship waiver. Again, we structured this to be as straightforward and limited burden as possible. So again, I would encourage you to return those documents to my office as soon as possible so that we can have you in the clearly identified as eligible for the 100% cost reimbursement. Next slide, please. The other element that we have been working closely with our colleagues at OCFS and DCJS is the release of the comprehensive fiscal plans. The planning instrument was released also about a month ago. The intent of the fiscal plan is to allow each locality to identify in advance the investments that are intended to be made, and then also, most importantly, for the state to be able to have an instrument that we can approve so that you can proceed with confidence knowing that the specific investments that you're making across the spectrum of services will be eligible for the reimbursement. That planning instrument is available, and our presentation includes the location for it. To date, we have received the return of 3 fiscal planning instruments. Again, we would encourage you to complete them as quickly as you feel comfortable doing so. There is no fixed deadline for the submission of the initial draft of the fiscal instrument. You should feel free to submit it as quickly or take as much time as you feel is necessary to appropriately capture the relevant information. Also, just a point of emphasis, we anticipate that as we move forward with the on-the-ground implementation of the Raise the Age program across the state, that there will be need for modifications to the investments. So it will be possible for counties to submit periodic modifications as we learn and see how the system is operating in practice as opposed to in forecast. That concludes the fiscal presentation. I believe Cal may have some concluding remarks before we go back to any questions.
Hi, this is Carrie Neisfeld from the Governor's Office for Cal. I just wanted to take a minute to thank for participating, and as you can see, the state implementation team has been working hard over the last 18 months to ensure that we are ready and to help all the counties be ready. And we also like to thank you for all the effort that you've been putting into getting your counties ready to do Raise the Age effectively. So we, at this point in the presentation, we can turn it over to the counties for questions. And as Katie said, if there are questions that we don't get to, we'll be happy to work with you to make sure that they all get answered. And as always, there's information on the state's Raise the Age website, and there's also the Ask the Question submission on the Raise the Age website where you can ask any questions that you don't get answered today.
Hi, everyone. This is Katie Holman from NYSAC again. I just want to remind everybody that we will this afternoon be sending out a link of where you can find the recording and the PowerPoint for the presentation. So that should be in your inbox. We'll be sending it out through Constant Contact. I'm going to ask a few questions. The entire panelists are all unmuted, so they'll be able to jump in based on the questions we have. Our first question is, will there be a targeted partnership with the WIOA youth programming? I don't know if Nina, you can answer that.
I'll take a quick stab at it. We have been working with the Department of Labor to really look at how we can, sorry, there's a lot of feedback on the line, how we can better align what we're doing with what they're doing, either through our youth development programs or at our individual Raise the Age programs. But we don't have an official work plan yet around the WIOA work, but we are interested and open to ideas, and maybe Bob has been working with them on the probation side.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Bob Macaron. There's a lot of feedback.
One second. I would just ask that everybody, if you're not speaking right now, to just mute your line just so we don't have too much background feed. Okay. Sorry, Bob. You can take it away.
That's okay. So we are working, I think I heard the question. We work with, and are continue to work with the Department of Labor on the development of Creative University. We're also working with the SUNY Educational Opportunity Centers. There are 24 educational opportunity centers across the state of New York and a number of Attain laboratories for computer programming, et cetera. So we're working with the Educational Assistance Opportunity Programs and the Department of Labor in the development and delivery of Career University, which is really both an educational and vocational training program, 28 hours, delivered by trained probation officers. They can also be private contractors who are trained in the NIC, National Institute of Corrections, 180-hour certified curriculum. So we are working closely with those agencies. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Bob. We've gotten a few questions on whether the tax cap compliance form is located on a website anywhere or if it can be resubmitted to the chief elected.
I do not believe that document is not currently on the dedicated Raise the Age website. Katie, what I might suggest is if there are individual counties that do not have that at easy access, maybe they could communicate to you and you could put them in touch with my office and we'll work with them directly to make sure that it gets to the right people.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
We have a question. Will docs have a dedicated YO, I'm assuming AO parole officers in each county once they've completed their time?
They will be integrated into a overall caseload, which is a mixed caseload approach, but we will ensure that the ratios are, as outlined in the presentation, will be maintained.
Great, thank you. We got a question, will there be reimbursement for administrative costs for Raise the Age?
Katie, I'll take that. I think if there are additional staffing actions that are needed and that are identified and documented to be reasonable and necessary for the purpose of implementing any of the program requirements, the answer would be yes. I think what we will have to work with in terms of each plan and review is to make sure that those administrative costs are something that is truly new and incremental to any services that were being provided previous to the Raise the Age statute.
Okay, thank you, Todd. I'm seeing a lot of repetitive questions we have at this point, so I don't want to keep asking the same question. I think what I'm going to do, there are some specific ones for counties to some of you, so I'm going to just have the state answer these questions, and we will get them out to each participant that did submit a question, just so everybody's questions are answered. I just wanted to say if anybody else has any questions to please submit, and we will make sure that they are responded to within a day or so. I want to thank our panelists for being on the webinar today and providing this information. And as I mentioned prior to this, you can contact myself or Dave Lucas in the office, and we will get you any information you need. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time.